Here is the news right now as we're getting it from Bloomberg. Nigeria's largest company by market cap on the Nigerian Stock Exchange. Dangote Cement says is planning a London share sale over the next 2 years. That's what Bloomberg is reporting this morning as we speak. The company is looking to raise this money via share auction, and that will be a very big news for the Nigerian market and for everyone who is watching Nigeria from outside. Now, we also told you earlier that we have new members of the high-profile appointments made on Monday by Dangote Cement with Joseph Makoju, who's been a special advisor to Aliko Dangote for a number of years, a full-time CEO of the cement company. And this team, technically speaking, will be the one, and including others who are also on the board, will be packaging this $500 million offering that will be on the London Stock Exchange. This will be coming after we had Seplat Petroleum also did an offering on the London Stock Exchange. So we're seeing more of Nigerian companies stepping into the global marketplace, not just via the Eurobond, but listing on one of the exchanges where you have most of African companies listed, and that's in London. Yesterday, the London Stock Exchange reported a very good earnings. By the way, it's a PLC of its own. Eronmosele Aziba is still hanging in here to give us some of his first thoughts on some of these earnings that are coming through, and as we're carving that with just what is just coming from Dangote Cement. This inclusion of new non-executive directors looks like a very game changer for if you are trying to list in London and you have the wife of the former Prime Minister of Britain, then it looks like you've put your money where your mouth is.
Well, definitely. I mean, in terms of perception of the company, looking at the board of directors, those who are running the company, I think it's quite a good move for them. And like you mentioned, with the plan of listing on London Stock Exchange also, it's quite positive for the company.
Yeah, when you try to analyze a company, you pay particular attention also to who's who on the board. It's very important, not just the bottom line.
Yeah, I mean, even the pedigree of the individuals that are on the board of directors are directing the affairs of the company also play a role in terms of corporate governance is another thing that's quite important, especially when you're going outside the shores of the country. And with this reshuffle and new appointments that we've seen, it's all steps in the right direction for the company.
Then if you look at the earnings and you try to place Lafarge side by side, Dangote Cement, it looks like the gap between the two just keep widening each time you see the numbers.
I mean, definitely in Nigeria, Dangote Cement remains the major market player in that space, even in terms of earnings, recording PBT of over 100 billion already, recording higher sales. Volume growth has also improved, which also feeds into the general conditions of the economy. We know we had a number of quarters of decline in volume growth in 2014, but from the first quarter result that we've seen volume growth improve in Nigeria, which also signals that activities have started to pick up. We might start seeing more building activities, and all these are positive for the company.
When Dangote Cement starts reporting higher numbers, in particular volume sales, that tells you who are the big buyers in Nigeria. Well, if you discount exports from Nigeria by road to maybe Ghana, Niger, and a few others, Nigeria still as a home country, it means that someone is spending money somewhere, and that big person is the big brother. Oh, no, they're not that big brother. They're the Federal Republic of Nigeria. Sorry, they're not that big brother. No, that's a different big brother.
I mean, you have, with the plans for capital expenditure from the government as well, we have a lot of capital projects coming up. In terms of development in the real estate sector, we have quite a number of construction works going on. We know the dearth of infrastructure in the country and how this has sort of stalled growth over the years. But with increased activities in that space is largely positive. I mean, even in terms of job creation, I mean, for construction of companies, you're going to hire laborers. That's going to, so that's how the flow of funds will move around and generally improve conditions.
Because when companies report numbers, it shows that something is happening within the economy.
Definitely.
That's what it means, really.
And in a situation where prices haven't necessarily been raised higher within the period,
yes.
You can see that volumes have improved, and that's positive.
That's positive. Let's switch to the banks. We can keep talking about Dangote Cement for all we care, but let's switch to the banks. First Bank, oh sorry, FBN Holdings. Why do I have First Bank in my head? I just keep seeing the building on the island every day, almost have more than half of my life. So it looks like I got that elephant in my head all the time. It's one of the oldest Nigerian banks anyway. The oldest by today. So I really you got the old man in your head. So most people realize First Bank, and they say First Bank, FBN Holdings, because it's a supermarket. It's a financial supermarket. And this supermarket just reported 25 kobo per share. You think that's consistent with what these peers are doing?
Well, in terms of looking at the dividend yield, that might be one of the things that might attract investors to take position in the stock. We know a lot of Nigerian investors seek to invest in stocks that are going to pay them dividends. So the fact that they're paying dividend should be one of the things that could attract investors.
No, dividend is number one.
Definitely.
I don't have dividend, I'm not likely your friend. As an investor in Nigeria, I want that little check, no matter how little it is.
And even in terms of the performance of the company, we've seen some improvements with PAT growing over 200%, thereabouts, to about 40 billion. I mean, considering where the company is coming from, this is definitely a significant improvement.
And if we look at peers like UBA, Zenith, and GT for full year and first quarter, does it look like the banks are on trajectory here to deliver for the current year?
Well, looking at their Q1 results that have already come out, we've seen Zenith, we've seen GT, we've seen UBA as well. They've been positive. One key thing that we've noticed is in terms of their credit impairment charges, we've seen some reduction or a reduction in the pace of increases in impairment charges, which sort of signals the improvement that we've seen in the economy. We know that some of these banks have restructured some of these loans. Some of these loans which weren't performing before have started performing, and these have all been positive, and our outlook on this sector for the year still remains largely positive. I mean, despite the tougher operating environment that we saw in 2014, 2015, 2016, and even 2017, these banks were still able to turn out impressive results. Although we're more optimistic on the tier one banks, likes of the Access, GT, Zenith, UBA.
And you think Stanbic is also pulling its weight within this group?
Yes, so for Stanbic, they also had some write-backs, which also boosted their results. But generally, across the banking space, we've seen resilience of Nigerian banks. And even comparing the performance of Nigerian banks with peers across other emerging markets in terms of return on equity, Nigerian banks are right up there with peers, and this shows that the checks and balances that have been put in place for these banks have been quite effective, ensuring that these banks are able to deliver alpha to investors.
Your report at Afrinvest for 2018, well, last year was quite good, very, very voluminous. And do you think with what we're seeing now, we're a bit on a trajectory, despite that fine line at the bottom that says, look, we will have a bit of a pressure when political engineering and politicking begins to take more shape and become more hotly contested in the run-up to next first quarter 2019?
Well, we still remain optimistic. The report you're referring to, our 2017 banking sector report, which we launched at the London Stock Exchange, titled Nigeria is Open for Business, and it truly is. I mean, in terms of looking at foreign inflows that have come into the country, remained upbeat and continued to improve. In 2018 as well, Q1 and Q2, we've also seen these foreign inflows remain at high levels. We expect sentiment to remain positive, although we know that a possible downside risk is tied to the political uncertainty as general elections draw closer. But we don't really expect this to crystallize until later in the year, probably closer to the end of the third quarter of 2018 or Q4 of 2018. But regardless, we still remain optimistic on performance of companies and the broader performance of the economy.
If you're going to make money, you got to make it now.
Well, for investors who have a more short-term investment horizon, we would recommend that they come in now and look towards exiting closer to the third quarter or fourth quarter.
So my outlook should be a bit of a short.
Like I said, it depends on sort of investment or horizon you're looking at. If you're a long-term investor, there's still a lot of value right there in Nigerian markets. Like I mentioned, comparing with peers, you can see that Nigerian equities still remain somewhat undervalued. If you look at their performance relative to how they're valued, relative to peers, you can still see there's still value there for investors. So for an investor who has a long-term investment horizon, they're fundamentally sound stocks right there in the market that you can take position in.
So Dangote Cement is going to London Stock Exchange 2 years, well, technically the year 2020. I should be getting ready for that. Yesterday, I got a full folks asking me, how do I get into the MTN offering? And I said, well, the offering hasn't even started yet.
Yeah, so it shows that there's a lot of interest.
I said, hey, boss, are you aware of this? And I said, yes, I'm aware. How do I get into this MTN? This is not an advertorial for we don't have the volume, we don't have the price and valuation yet. But folks are starting to ask questions, which means that Nigerians have not just a short, but medium to long term on these big names. If MTN is coming with about $500 million, and Dangote Cement is looking at $500 million, I might just put some dollars aside for Dangote Cement for the next London IPO. Maybe I should be thinking about that. Are you thinking in that direction?
Well, I mean, with these listings that are coming in, definitely a lot of investors are going to be looking to take position in these companies. Like I mentioned, historically, they've demonstrated their resilience, churning out impressive performances, and we only expect this to continue going forward, which is why we're seeing a lot of interest in these instruments. So definitely, we'll be looking into taking position right there.
At the end of it all, where do you think my play field should be? More of equities, less of fixed income, as fixed income begin to trend towards single digits, and we saw that this week with one of the papers maturing, Treasury bills at about 9%.
Well, for us, what we would recommend is some sort of balanced approach, balanced play between equities and fixed income. So for fixed income, to hedge your risks from equities that you could potentially have. Yes, you might get lower returns from fixed income markets, but your capital preservation is assured. With the equities, there's also the downside risk that you might end up losing some money. But again, like I mentioned, in terms of valuation, there's still opportunities to take advantage of in the market, especially considering the fact that in February and March, we saw a slowdown in market performance, which drove prices of some of the stocks down to attractive entry
Where would
levels.
The catalyst be? I'm looking for something to give me a runaway. Just give me a jump on the all-share index, maybe back to 45,000.
I mean, currently looking at market performance, we might not see the sort of gains that we saw in 2017, but we still remain optimistic on performance. Like I mentioned, with improvements in macroeconomic indicators, stability in the FX markets, rising oil prices, and all this.
Whatever you analysts say,
to a positive performance.
At the end of the day, you analysts are always optimistic. Whatever the downside is, you always say, we remain optimistic.
I mean, you have to remain hopeful on performance.
That's a handshake for some optimism from Eronmosele Aziba, who is one of the investment analysts at Afrinvest. Thank you for coming. coming.
Thank you.
And we'll keep an eye on Dangote Cement's $500 million. That's a lot of money. We can wait 2 years, can't we? Yes, we can. Let's wait for 2 minutes. We'll be right back here on Business Morning.